Get up and move down to economy class right now so our VIP guests can sit there. Someone like you doesn't deserve to sit in this airplane cabin.
You need to move from that seat immediately, sir. The flight attendant's voice was not loud. That made it worse. It was cold, sharp, controlled, the kind of voice people use when they want everyone nearby to hear without admitting they are making a scene. Ethan Caldwell looked up from seat 1A. For one quiet second, he did not speak. Around him, the first-class cabin of Summit Ridge Airlines Flight 417 seemed to hold its breath. A champagne glass stopped halfway to a woman's mouth. A businessman across the aisle lowered his newspaper by an inch. Somewhere behind the curtain, a child laughed, then went silent, as if the air itself had changed. Laura Mitchell stood over Ethan, with a tablet pressed against her waist. She was 36, polished, careful, and tense around the eyes. Her hair was pinned so tightly it looked painful. Her smile was still there, but it had become a thin line. Not kindness, not service, a warning. "Sir," she said again, slower this time, "we need you to get up." Ethan blinked once. He was 48 years old, tall, broad-shouldered, and tired in the way only certain men become tired, not from lack of sleep alone. From rooms where they had to prove they belonged before they were allowed to speak. From decades of being watched first and respected later. He wore a navy blazer over a plain gray t-shirt, dark jeans, and polished brown loafers. No gold watch, no diamond cuff links, no loud designer bag. Just a black carry-on in the overhead bin, a leather briefcase under the seat, and a boarding pass resting on his lap. Seat 1A, first class, paid in full, booked weeks ago. "I'm sorry," Ethan said, his voice low and steady. "What seems to be the problem?" Laura's eyes flicked over his shoulder toward the front galley. That small glance told him more than her words did. Near the entrance stood a man in a pale blue shirt with the sleeves rolled just enough to look casual. He was 34, sandy-haired, clean-shaven, and impatient in a way that looked expensive. His sunglasses sat on top of his head. One hand rested on the handle of a black carry-on. The other tapped against his thigh. Brandon Hayes. Ethan did not know his name yet, but he knew the type. A man raised by doors that opened before he touched the handle. A man who thought inconvenience was something that happened to other people. Laura cleared her throat. "There appears to be a seating mix-up," she said. "We're asking you to move to another seat so we can accommodate one of our premium guests." Ethan looked down at his boarding pass, then back at her. "This is my seat." "I understand that, sir." "No," Ethan said gently. "I don't think you do." A few heads turned. Laura's face tightened. Behind her, Brandon shifted his weight. He looked annoyed now, not embarrassed. That mattered. A decent man would have stepped forward and said it was fine. A decent man would have sat in the seat printed on his ticket. Brandon didn't either. He waited, like the world was late, correcting itself. Laura lowered her voice, but not enough. "Mr. Hayes is a Diamond executive member with Summit Ridge. He flies this route often, and seat 1A is usually reserved for him." The words landed in the cabin like a small stone dropped into still water. Ethan did not move. He had spent the last week in Phoenix closing a deal that had taken 14 months to complete. 14 months of lawyers, revisions, late calls, delayed signatures, and men smiling across conference tables while testing how little they could offer him. That morning, the final documents had gone through. His company, Caldwell Systems, had just secured the largest expansion contract in its history. Almost no one in that cabin knew that. Almost no one knew that Caldwell Systems built the scheduling software, crew management tools, and maintenance tracking platforms used by major corporations across the country. Almost no one knew Summit Ridge Airlines depended on those systems every single day, and Ethan preferred it that way. Power, to him, did not need to announce itself, but disrespect always did.
"What seat is Mr. Hayes assigned?"
Ethan asked. Laura hesitated. It was brief, but everyone saw it. "Sir, we're just trying to keep boarding moving." "What seat is he assigned?" The question was quiet, but it cut clean. Laura glanced at her tablet. 3C. A woman across the aisle, silver-haired and elegant in a cream sweater, looked up sharply. Her name was Helen Parker. She was 68 years old, a retired school principal from Arizona, and she had heard enough excuses in her lifetime to recognize one wearing a uniform. Ethan turned his head slightly toward Brandon. 3C is in first class, correct? Brandon gave a short laugh. Look, man, it's not a big deal. Ethan looked at him then. Really looked. It became a big deal when you asked someone else to give up what he paid for. Brandon's smile faded. Laura stepped in quickly. Gentlemen, please. We don't want this to become uncomfortable. Helen Parker set her scarf down in her lap. It already is, she said. Laura turned to her surprised. Helen did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Age had given her a kind of authority that did not ask permission. That man is sitting where he belongs, Helen said. You should be speaking to the gentleman standing in the aisle. Brandon's jaw tightened. The businessman with the newspaper pretended to read again, but his eyes stayed fixed on the scene. 2 rows back, someone lifted a phone, just slightly. The cabin had become a courtroom without a judge. Laura swallowed. Mom, we have the situation under control. No, Helen said. You have the wrong man under pressure. The words hung there. Simple, devastating. Ethan felt them, though his face did not change. He had learned a long time ago not to let strangers see every wound they opened. His father had taught him that. Back in Baltimore, in a small kitchen with peeling paint and a humming refrigerator, his father used to say, "Son, never confuse calm with surrender. Sometimes calm is the strongest thing a man owns." So Ethan stayed calm. Laura's tablet shifted in her grip. Mr. Caldwell, she said, colder now. We are offering you another first-class seat. Same service, same cabin. We would appreciate your flexibility. There it was, flexibility. Ethan had heard that word in boardrooms when people wanted him to accept less than he was worth. He had heard it in banks when lenders questioned numbers they would have trusted from someone else. He had heard it at private dinners when men praised his company, then asked who really built the software. Flexibility, a soft word for a hard insult. Ethan placed his boarding pass on the armrest. I booked this seat. Yes, sir. I paid for this seat. Yes, I boarded when I was called. Laura said nothing. And I am sitting exactly where my ticket says I should sit. Brandon exhaled through his nose. For God's sake, he muttered. It's just a seat. Ethan turned to him. If it's just a seat, he said, why are you asking for mine? Silence. Not empty silence. Heavy silence, the kind that reveals people. Laura's cheeks flushed. Brandon looked away first. Helen Parker nodded once slowly, as if she had just seen a man refuse to disappear. Then Laura straightened. Her smile was gone now. All right, Mr. Caldwell, she said. I'll get my supervisor. She turned and walked toward the galley, heels striking the floor in clipped little blows. Tap, tap, tap. Brandon remained in the aisle for one more second, staring at Ethan like he was trying to understand why the script had failed. Ethan gave him nothing. No anger, no apology, no fear. Just presence. And in that moment, the cabin did not know the truth yet. They did not know that the quiet man in seat 1A was not simply another passenger trying to avoid embarrassment. They did not know that his company helped keep Summit Ridge's operation running. They did not know that the systems moving their crews, flights, and maintenance schedules had his name buried deep in the contracts. They only saw a man they had been invited to underestimate. Ethan looked out the window at the gray Texas sky. His breathing was slow. His hands were still. But something inside him had changed. This was no longer about comfort. It was no longer about legroom, service, or a window seat. It was about a simple question America still failed too often. Who gets to belong before they are recognized? And who is asked to move before anyone bothers to see them? Laura Mitchell disappeared behind the front curtain, but her anger did not leave the cabin. It stayed there. It settled over the leather seats. It clung to the soft overhead lights. It moved through the rows in small looks and quiet breaths, in the way people shifted without wanting to seem involved. Ethan Caldwell remained seated in 1A. His hands rested on the armrests. His shoulders stayed loose. His face was still. To anyone watching, he looked almost too calm. But inside, his mind had already begun doing what it always did under pressure. Observe, record, measure. He noticed Brandon Hayes standing near the galley, pretending to check his phone. Brandon's thumb moved across the screen, but his eyes kept lifting toward Ethan. He wanted the seat. Still. More than that, he wanted the room to agree that he deserved it. That was the dangerous part. Not the preference, the permission. Across the aisle, Helen Parker adjusted the gold chain around her neck. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from anger. She had spent 35 years as a school principal. She knew what bullying looked like when it wore a smile. She had seen children do it, parents do it, teachers do it, adults in suits do it. And now she was seeing it at the front of a first-class cabin. She leaned toward Ethan just enough for him to hear. "You're doing the right thing," she said. Ethan turned his head a little. "Thank you." His voice was quiet. Helen studied him for a moment. She expected bitterness. She expected sharpness. Instead, she saw something heavier. A man holding himself together because he knew the world punished the wrong kind of reaction. That made her chest ache. Behind them, the boarding line had slowed. A young mother paused with a diaper bag on her shoulder. A college student squeezed past with headphones around his neck. An older man in a Navy cap muttered, "What's the holdup?" And then saw Ethan, saw Brandon, saw the tense faces of the crew. He stopped muttering. From the galley, Laura's voice rose in low, hurried pieces. "He won't move," a man answered. "Did you explain the situation?" "I did. He's refusing." There was a pause. Then a deeper voice said, "All right, I'll handle it." The curtain parted. Andrew Collins stepped into the cabin. He was 42, tall, square-jawed, with the polished posture of someone used to being obeyed in tight spaces. His uniform looked perfect. His smile looked practiced. But his eyes were already hard before he reached Ethan's row. Laura followed half a step behind him, holding the tablet like evidence. Brandon straightened when he saw Andrew, as if reinforcement had arrived. Andrew stopped beside seat 1A. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, smooth and formal. "My name is Andrew Collins. I'm the lead flight attendant on this aircraft." Ethan looked up. "Good afternoon." Andrew gave a small nod, the kind that pretended respect while preparing to remove it. "I understand there's some confusion about the seat assignment." "There isn't," Ethan said. Andrew's smile flickered. Ethan lifted the boarding pass from the armrest. "My ticket says 1A. Your gate agent scanned it. I boarded with first class. I'm seated in 1A. That is not confusion." A man in row 2 looked down quickly, as if Ethan's clarity embarrassed him. Andrew inhaled slowly through his nose. "Mr. Caldwell, we appreciate that you have documentation, but sometimes operational needs require adjustments." Ethan kept his eyes on him. "What operational need?" Andrew blinked. "Excuse me?" "What operational need requires me to move from a confirmed first-class seat to accommodate another passenger who also has a confirmed first-class seat?" Laura's lips pressed together. Brandon gave a soft laugh from the galley. "Man, this is ridiculous." Helen turned toward him. "What's ridiculous is asking someone else to move because you like his chair." Brandon's face flushed. Andrew lifted one hand. "Mom, please let us manage the situation." "I was," Helen said, "until you started mismanaging it." A few passengers reacted then, not loudly. A cough, a breath, one quiet, uncomfortable laugh that died quickly. Andrew's jaw tightened. He turned back to Ethan. "Sir, I'm asking for your cooperation." "No," Ethan said. "You're asking for my seat." The words were not loud. They did not need to be. Andrew leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I want to be clear. Failure to comply with crew instructions can create a serious issue." There it was, the shift, from request to warning, from customer service to control. Ethan felt the old familiar cold move through his chest. He had heard versions of that sentence before, in hotel lobbies, in private clubs, at security desks and office towers where he owned more equity than the men asking for his ID. His face did not change. "Is this a safety instruction?" Ethan asked. Andrew paused. "Sir, all crew instructions are important." "That wasn't my question." The cabin tightened around them. Ethan spoke slowly. "Is my sitting in seat 1A a safety concern?" Andrew's eyes flicked toward Laura. "No, but is my boarding pass invalid?" "No one is saying, am I intoxicated? No. Have I threatened anyone?" Andrew's mouth opened, then closed. Ethan looked from Andrew to Laura to Brandon. "Then what exactly am I failing to comply with?" No one answered. For the first time, Brandon looked uneasy. Not afraid, uneasy. There is a difference. Fear is what people feel when power turns against them. Unease is what they feel when the story they are telling themselves stops working. Laura shifted on her feet. "Mr. Caldwell, you're making this more difficult than it has to be." Ethan looked at her then, not with anger, with disappointment. That was worse. "I'm not making it difficult," he said. "I'm making it visible." The sentence landed hard. A woman in row 3 lifted her phone higher. The screen glowed pale against her face. Her thumb hovered over the record button, then pressed. His expression changed. Not much. Just enough. He understood cameras. Airlines understood cameras. In the age of live streams, a bad decision did not stay in the cabin. It became a headline before the wheels left the ground. Still, pride can be louder than judgment. Andrew straightened. Mr. Caldwell, I'm going to give you one final opportunity to resolve this quietly. Helen whispered, "Oh, for heaven's sake." Andrew ignored her. "We can move you to 3C. Same cabin, same service. I'll personally make sure you're taken care of." Ethan looked past him toward Brandon. Brandon was watching closely now, mouth set, eyes narrowed. Ethan looked back at Andrew.
And Mr. Hayes?
Andrew's face stiffened. He would sit here, in my seat, in the seat we are trying to make available. Ethan almost smiled, but there was no humor in it. That is a very careful way to say theft. Laura's eyes widened. "Sir, that's inappropriate." "No," Ethan said. "What's inappropriate is dressing up a wrong decision in polite language and hoping I'll be too embarrassed to name it." The plane seemed smaller now. The hum of the air vents grew louder. Somewhere in economy, a suitcase banged into an overhead bin. A baby fussed, then quieted. The world continued, but in first class, everything had narrowed to one man sitting still and three people trying to make him smaller. Andrew stepped back. His face had gone red under the collar. "I'm calling the ground supervisor." "Do what you need to do," Ethan said. Andrew stared at him. Ethan's tone never changed. That was what made it unbearable. Laura turned quickly and followed Andrew toward the front. Brandon remained behind, but now he was no longer tapping. His hand was still on the handle of his carry-on. Helen leaned back in her seat and let out a slow breath. "You know," she said softly, "some people think manners mean never making anyone uncomfortable." Ethan looked at her. She kept her eyes forward. "But sometimes the decent thing is to make the right people uncomfortable." For the first time since Laura had approached him, Ethan's expression softened. "My father would have liked you," he said. Helen smiled, but it was sad. "He sounds like a smart man." He was. The word came out quieter than Ethan expected. For a moment, the cabin faded. He saw his father's hands, rough hands, postal workers' hands, hands that carried mail through Baltimore rain and summer heat, hands that counted bills at the kitchen table, hands that straightened Ethan's tie before his first scholarship interview. "Don't beg for a place you earned," his father had told him. "Stand in it." Ethan looked down at the boarding pass in his hand. Seat 1A, a rectangle of paper, so small, so ordinary, and yet people had built a storm around it. The front curtain opened again. This time, Robert Fletcher entered. He was 50, broad, calm, and dressed in the dark suit of a ground operations supervisor. A radio clipped to his belt crackled softly. His eyes moved across the cabin with the practiced scan of a man trained to locate the problem quickly. He looked at Ethan, then at Brandon, then at the phones. His face changed by a fraction. He understood the room. But understanding did not mean he would do the right thing. "Mr. Caldwell," Robert said, stopping beside the aisle. "I'm Robert Fletcher with Summit Ridge Ground Operations. I'd like to speak with you about resolving this matter." Ethan nodded once. "I'm listening." Robert's voice was calm, too calm. "We have a full flight, a departure window, and passengers waiting. At this point, we need to prevent any further delay." Ethan held his gaze. "I agree." "Good. Then I'm sure you understand that sometimes the best solution is the one that lets everyone move forward." Helen's eyes narrowed. Ethan did not blink. "Everyone?" he asked. Robert paused. "Yes." Ethan looked around the cabin, at the passengers watching, at Laura standing near the galley, pale and rigid, at Andrew with his arms folded, at Brandon, who still had a first-class seat waiting for him but wanted more. Then Ethan looked back at Robert. "Mr. Fletcher," he said, "everyone can move forward as soon as Mr. Hayes sits in 3C. A faint murmur passed through the cabin. Robert's smile disappeared. The mask slipped. Just a little. "Sir," he said, "I would strongly advise you not to escalate this." Ethan's hand closed gently around the boarding pass. "I'm not escalating it." He leaned back. "You are." For the first time, Robert Fletcher had no immediate answer. And somewhere near row 3, a phone camera caught every second. Robert Fletcher stood in the aisle with one hand resting near the radio on his belt. He did not touch it yet. That was part of the performance. The threat had to remain just out of frame, close enough to feel, far enough to deny. Ethan Caldwell saw it clearly. So did Helen Parker. So did the woman in row 3, whose phone was now angled toward the aisle with the quiet courage of someone who had decided to look away. Robert took one slow breath. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, "I'm trying to help you." Ethan looked at him. "No, you're trying to help this airline avoid admitting what is happening." A faint ripple moved through the cabin. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Laura Mitchell's face tightened at the galley. Andrew Collins shifted his stance beside her, arms crossed, jaw locked. Brandon Hayes looked away toward the cockpit door, as though the whole thing had become beneath him. But it was not beneath him. It was because of him. Robert kept his voice even. "Sir, I need you to understand the seriousness of refusing a crew directive." Ethan tilted his head slightly. "Then explain the directive." Robert blinked. Ethan continued. "Explain it in clear words, not customer service language, not operational language. Clear words." The cabin grew still. "What exactly are you directing me to do?" Robert's fingers flexed near the radio. "We are directing you to relocate to another seat." "Why?" "To accommodate another passenger." "Why does that passenger require my seat?" Robert's eyes flicked to Brandon. Brandon lifted his chin but did not speak. Ethan's voice stayed calm.
Is he disabled?
"No." "Is there a medical issue?" "No." "Is there a security requirement?" "No." "Was I double booked?" Robert hesitated. Laura looked down. Andrew said nothing. Ethan nodded once, almost to himself. "So the answer is no." Robert's face hardened. "Mr. Caldwell, you are turning a manageable situation into a confrontation." "No," Ethan said. A manageable situation was Mr. Hayes sitting in 3C. A man in row 2 gave a quiet, involuntary chuckle. He immediately looked down at his shoes. Robert heard it. Everyone heard it. Control was slipping, not loudly, not dramatically, but like water under a door. Brandon stepped forward at last. "Look," he said, his voice sharper now. "I don't know why this has to become some big moral issue." Ethan turned his head. Brandon spread one hand, as if he were being reasonable. "I fly this route constantly. They know me here. That seat is part of my profile. It should have been blocked off. I don't know what happened with the system, but I shouldn't be punished for it." Helen Parker stared at him. "Punished?" she said. Brandon glanced at her. "Yes, punished." Helen leaned forward, her silver hair catching the cabin light.
You have a first-class seat.
"That's not the point," Brandon snapped. "No," Helen said. "It is exactly the point." Brandon's cheeks reddened. Ethan looked at him, and for a brief moment, he almost felt sorry for the man. Not because Brandon was suffering. He was not. But because he had lived long enough without hearing no that a normal inconvenience felt like an attack. That kind of life damages a person too, just in a quieter way. Ethan's voice softened, but only slightly. "Mr. Hayes, no one is punishing you. You were assigned a seat. I was assigned a seat. The difference is you expect my assignment to matter less than yours." Brandon opened his mouth. No words came out. The sentence had found the center of the thing. Robert stepped in quickly. "Enough. Mr. Caldwell, if you continue to refuse, we may have to involve airport security." Laura's eyes dropped. Andrew looked toward the cabin door. A few passengers stiffened. That word always changed a room. Security. It turned a disagreement into a warning. It turned a paying customer into a problem. It gave everyone watching permission to wonder what the person had done wrong, even when the answer was nothing. Ethan felt the weight of it. He knew how fast the story could change. Black man removed from plane. Passenger refuses crew instruction. Disruptive traveler delays flight. Those words could travel farther than truth. He leaned back slowly. "Then before you call security," he said, "I want your full name, your position, and the reason for removal stated clearly on camera." Robert's eyes narrowed.
Camera?
The woman in row 3 did not lower her phone. Another passenger in row 4 raised his. The businessman with the newspaper folded it carefully and set it aside. His face had changed now. He had been content to watch when it seemed like a small inconvenience. But the word security had made the moral line visible. Helen lifted her chin. "I'll be a witness," she said. Robert looked at her. "Mom, please stay out of this." "No," she said. "I stayed out of too many things when I was younger. I'm not doing it again." There was something in her voice that made the cabin in a different way. Not tense, human. For a second, Ethan looked at Helen, and she looked back. Neither smiled. The moment was too serious for that. But there was recognition there. The kind that passes between strangers when one person refuses to let another stand alone. Robert's radio crackled. A gate agent's voice came through, faint and impatient. Robert, status on 417. We're holding the door. Robert lifted the radio, eyes still on Ethan. Stand by, he said into it. Then he lowered it. Mr. Caldwell, this is your last chance to accept a reasonable accommodation. Ethan looked at the boarding pass in his hand. Reasonable. Another soft word. Another blanket thrown over a hard thing. His thumb moved across the edge of the paper. He thought of every person who had given in just to keep peace. Every traveler who had swallowed humiliation because they had a meeting, a funeral, a grandchild waiting at the other end. Every person told it would be easier to move, easier to smile, easier to let it go. Maybe sometimes letting go was wisdom, but sometimes it trained the world to keep taking. Ethan lifted his eyes. I will not accept an accommodation for a problem I did not create. Robert's face went still. Ethan continued. If you remove me for the truth. Not for safety, not for disruption, not for non-compliance. Remove me because a more familiar passenger wanted my seat, and your staff decided my rights were negotiable. No one spoke. The cabin lights hummed above them. The air vent whispered. Somewhere in the back, a suitcase latch clicked shut. Then Brandon said quietly but clearly, "This is insane." Ethan looked at him. "No," he said. "This is ordinary. That's why it matters." The words landed like a verdict. Robert looked toward Andrew. Andrew looked at Laura. Laura looked down at her tablet, but her hands were no longer steady. Something had shifted in her. Not enough to make her brave, not yet, but enough to make her uncomfortable with herself. She remembered the way Ethan had first shown his boarding pass. Calm, clear, patient. She remembered how quickly she had dismissed it. Not because the system said he was wrong. It did not. Not because policy required it. It did not. But because Brandon Hayes was familiar, demanding, and important in the way the airline had trained her to recognize. Ethan Caldwell had been quiet, so she had mistaken him for movable. That thought hit her harder than she expected. Andrew leaned toward Robert and whispered, "We're being recorded." Robert's eyes moved across the cabin. 3 phones now, maybe 4, maybe more. His calculation changed. Every supervisor in America had been trained, formally or not, to measure risk. A delayed flight was bad. An angry VIP was bad. But video of a calm black passenger being threatened with removal from a paid first-class seat because another man preferred it, that was worse, much worse. Robert turned back to Ethan. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, his tone flatter now, "we're going to review the seat map one more time." Ethan said nothing. Robert nodded to Laura. She tapped the tablet with stiff fingers. Andrew leaned over her shoulder. Brandon watched them both, his impatience now mixed with something close to disbelief. Laura swallowed. "The seat map shows Mr. Caldwell in 1A, she said quietly. Robert's eyes flashed. "And Mr. Hayes?" Laura's voice became smaller, 3C. Helen closed her eyes for 1 second, not in relief, in exhaustion. Robert took the tablet from Laura and looked at it himself, as if the facts might change under a different set of eyes. They did not. Ethan waited. The waiting was its own pressure. Finally, Robert handed the tablet back. "Mr. Hayes," he said, without turning fully toward him, "we'll need you to take your assigned seat in 3C so we can close the door." Brandon stared at him.
What?
Robert's mouth tightened.
We need to depart.
Brandon let out a short laugh. "You're kidding." "No, sir." Brandon looked from Robert to Laura to Andrew, searching for the old world to return. It did not. His face hardened. "I'll be filing a complaint." "That is your right," Robert said. Brandon grabbed his carry-on handle so sharply the wheels bumped against the aisle wall. He moved past Ethan, stopping for half a second beside seat 1A. He looked down. Ethan looked up. Brandon wanted to say something, something cutting, something that would restore the feeling of control. But the phones were still up, so he said nothing. He walked to 3C. The sound of his suitcase wheels over the carpet felt louder than it should have. Laura stood frozen near the galley. Andrew cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, forcing his service voice back into place. "Thank you for your patience. We'll be closing the boarding door shortly." No one answered. The cabin did not return to normal. It could not. Normal was the lie everyone had been asked to protect. Robert turned to Ethan one final time. "Mr. Caldwell, thank you for your cooperation." Ethan looked at him. "I did not cooperate," he said. "I remained seated." Robert's face tightened, but he nodded once and walked away. Laura lingered. For a moment, she seemed like she might say something, an apology, an explanation, a human sentence. But Andrew glanced at her from the galley, and she swallowed it. She turned away. Helen Parker reached across the aisle and touched the edge of Ethan's armrest, just lightly, just enough to be felt. "You held yourself well," she said. Ethan looked out the window. Ground crew moved beneath the gray sky. A baggage cart rolled past. The wing lights blinked red against the dull afternoon. "I wish that were enough," he said. Helen's voice softened. "Sometimes it is enough for the person watching who needed to see it." Ethan turned back to her. She gave a sad smile. "My grandson is 23, she said. "He travels for work now. I think about him every time I see something like this." Ethan nodded. He understood. This was never only about the person in the seat. It was about everyone who might sit there next. The boarding door closed with a heavy mechanical thud. The sound echoed through the cabin like a period at the end of a sentence no one wanted to read aloud. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate, Ethan reached to his briefcase and pulled out a small black notebook. He opened it to a clean page. His pen hovered for 1 second. Then he began to write. Summit Ridge Airlines, Flight 417, Dallas-Fort Worth to San Diego, Seat 1A, Laura Mitchell, Andrew Collins, Robert Fletcher, Brandon Hayes, witness, Helen Parker. He paused, then added one more line, reason given, flexibility. His jaw tightened just once. Outside, the engines began their low-rising roar. Inside, Ethan kept writing, because dignity remembered what power hoped people would forget. The plane climbed through a ceiling of gray clouds, and the city below disappeared piece by piece. First the runways blurred, then the highways. Then the whole world became a flat sheet of white outside Ethan Caldwell's window. Inside the cabin, the seatbelt sign glowed above the aisle. The engines held a steady roar. The first-class service routine began again, but it no longer felt graceful. It felt rehearsed over a wound. Laura Mitchell moved through the cabin with a tray of drinks. Her smile had returned, but it had no warmth left in it. Every time she stepped near row 1, her shoulders stiffened. She offered champagne to the couple behind Ethan. She offered sparkling water to Helen Parker. She paused beside Ethan only long enough to say, "Would you like anything to drink, sir?" Her voice was correct, nothing more. Ethan looked up from his notebook. "Water, please, of course." Laura turned away too quickly. Helen noticed. So did Ethan. He wrote one more line in the notebook. Service resumed. No apology. Across the aisle, Helen watched his pen move. She wanted to ask what he planned to do, but she did not. Some people write to remember. Some write because if they do not put the pain somewhere, it will sit too close to the heart. In seat 3C, Brandon Hayes sat rigidly with his jaw set. He had shoved his carry-on into the overhead bin with more force than necessary. Now he stared at his phone, scrolling without seeing. He had already started typing a complaint to Summit Ridge Customer Relations. He used words like loyalty, disappointed, mishandled, premium experience. He did not use the word entitled. People rarely name the thing that exposes them. Andrew Collins stood in the galley, pretending to organize service items. He kept glancing toward Brandon, then toward Ethan. He was not thinking about fairness, not yet. He was thinking about reports, passenger statements, the phone cameras, whether someone had captured his face clearly, whether the company light would back him. Laura returned with Ethan's water. This time, she placed it carefully on his tray table. "Here you are. Thank you." Their eyes met, only for a second. But it was enough for Laura to feel the quiet force of the man she had tried to move. There was no hatred in his expression. That unsettled her more than anger would have. Anger could be dismissed. Bitterness could be blamed. But dignity made excuses look small. Laura opened her mouth. She almost said, "I'm sorry." The words reached the edge of her throat. Then she heard Andrew behind her. "Laura," he called softly. She closed her mouth. "Yes," she said, and walked away. Ethan watched her go. He did not chase the apology. A forced apology could clean a surface, but it could not repair what had cracked underneath. The aircraft leveled off. The seatbelt sign blinked off with a soft chime. That sound loosened the cabin. People unbuckled. Trays opened. Phones came back into hands. Conversations restarted in low tones. But nothing was casual anymore. The woman in row 3, whose name was Sarah Klein, checked the video on her phone. She was 59, a nurse from Fort Worth flying to visit her daughter in California. Her hands were steady when holding patients in pain, but now they trembled around her phone. Her husband had once told her to stop getting involved in things that were not her business. But she had worked emergency rooms long enough to know the danger of that sentence. Pain always became someone's business eventually. She leaned into the aisle. "Sir," she said gently. Ethan turned. "Yes, Mom?" I recorded some of what happened. Not the very beginning, but enough. "If you need it, I can send it to you." Andrew froze in the galley. Laura lowered her eyes. Brandon looked up sharply. Ethan studied Sarah's face. She looked nervous, but not performative. She was not chasing attention. She was offering evidence because conscience had pushed her past comfort. "Thank you," Ethan said. "I may take you up on that." Sarah nodded. "My father was a deacon," she said. "He used to say silence makes a second injury." Ethan held her gaze for a moment. He was right. Helen turned towards Sarah. He was very right. A small line of humanity formed across the aisle then. Quiet, ordinary, not dramatic enough for a headline, but strong enough to matter. And that made Brandon angry. He pressed the call button. The chime cut through the cabin. Laura flinched before she turned. She walked back to row 3 with careful steps. "Yes, Mr. Hayes?" Brandon kept his eyes forward.
I'd like to speak with Andrew.
Laura's face tightened.
Is there something I can help you with?
"No," he said. "Andrew." The word was a command. Laura went to the galley. Andrew appeared seconds later, wearing the smile of a man stepping into a problem he wanted to keep private. "Mr. Hayes," he said quietly, "what can I do for you?" Brandon leaned toward him. "This is unacceptable. I was embarrassed in front of the cabin. I want this documented." Andrew nodded. "Of course. And I want it clear that I did not create this situation." Helen gave a small sound, not a laugh, something closer to disbelief. Brandon heard it. He turned.
Do you have something to say?
Helen looked at him with calm, tired eyes. "Yes," she said. "You created it when you wanted what was not yours." The cabin stilled again. Brandon's face went red. "You don't know anything about me. I know what I watched." "That man made it about race," Brandon snapped. Ethan slowly turned his head. No one breathed. Brandon knew he had gone too far the second the words left his mouth, but pride kept him moving. "He did," Brandon said, louder now. "Nobody said anything about race until he started acting like everyone was against him." Ethan unbuckled his seatbelt. The click was small, but it sounded enormous. He did not stand. He simply turned in his seat so he could face Brandon directly. "My name is Ethan Caldwell," he said. His voice was low, measured. "I have not raised my voice. I have not insulted you. I have not accused every person on this aircraft of being against me." Brandon looked away. Ethan continued. "What I did was ask a simple question. Why should your preference outrank my purchase?" Andrew opened his mouth. Ethan lifted one hand. "I'm not finished." Andrew closed it. Ethan's eyes stayed on Brandon. "You say I made it about race, but I want you to understand something. People who experience this kind of treatment learn to recognize patterns, not because they want to, because they have to. A boarding pass gets checked twice. A smile turns cold. A word like flexible shows up when dignity is being negotiated. A man with one seat is treated like a customer. Another man with one seat is treated like an obstacle. The cabin was silent. Even the engine noise seemed farther away. Ethan's voice slowed. "That does not mean every person here hates me. It means the system reached for the easier person to move, and it thought that person was me." Helen's eyes shone. Sarah Klein lowered her phone. She did not need to record this part. She needed to hear it. Brandon stared at his hands. For the first time, his anger had nowhere clean to land. Ethan turned back toward the window, but he did not pick up his notebook right away. The clouds outside were bright now. The plane had climbed above the storm into a hard white sun. It spilled across his face, showing the lines near his eyes, the tiredness there, and something deeper than tiredness. Memory. He thought of his first office, a rented room above a dry cleaner in Oakland, 3 second-hand desks, one bad printer, a coffee maker that leaked brown water onto the floor. He thought of the first client who asked if the real owner would be joining the meeting. He thought of the banker who praised his presentation, then denied the loan because the business seemed too ambitious. He had built Caldwell systems anyway, line by line, contract by contract, year by year. and now a company that depended on his work had almost moved him like luggage. Laura watched him from the galley. Something in her chest tightened. Not fear now, shame. She looked at Andrew. He was right, she whispered. Andrew stared at her. Do not do that right now. Laura swallowed. No, I mean it. The seat map was clear. We pushed him because Brandon wanted it. Andrew's face hardened. Keep your voice down. Why? Because we still have a flight to work. Laura looked toward Ethan, then toward Brandon, then at her own hands. For the first time that day, she seemed to understand that doing her job and doing right had not been the same thing. Andrew leaned closer. Laura, listen to me. We document this as a passenger seating disagreement. Nothing more. Ground handled it. We moved on. Laura did not answer because that was the lie forming in real time. A clean report, a neat phrase, a story with all the sharp edges sanded down. But Ethan's notebook was open. Sarah had video. Helen had witnessed every word. And Laura, whether she liked it or not, had heard herself choose the wrong side. The meal service began. Silverware clinked. Napkins unfolded. Warm bread moved down the aisle in a basket. Life tried to act normal again. But truth had already entered the cabin. It sat there with them, in seat 1A, calm, patient, unmoved. The lunch trays came and went, but the cabin never fully settled. Forks touched porcelain with soft, careful sounds. Ice shifted in glasses. A man in row 2 cleared his throat every few minutes, as if his own discomfort had become something physical. The flight moved smoothly over the Southwest, but inside first class, everyone carried the memory of what had happened before takeoff. Ethan Caldwell ate very little. He took 2 bites of the chicken, then set the fork down. His water glass stood untouched beside the tray. His notebook remained open under his left hand, the pen placed neatly across the page. He was not writing anymore. He was thinking. That was the part people rarely saw. They saw the calm face, the measured voice, the steady hands. They did not see the cost of restraint. They did not see the old wounds that reopened quietly. They did not see the effort it took not to become the version of him others were already prepared to fear. Helen Parker watched him from across the aisle. She had raised boys. She had buried a husband. She had spent years looking into the eyes of children who had been blamed before anyone asked what happened. She knew that look on Ethan's face, controlled pain, the kind that sits upright. She folded her napkin slowly. Mr. Caldwell, she said. Ethan turned toward her. Please, he said. Ethan is fine. Helen gave a small nod. Ethan, may I ask you something? Of course. How many times have you had to do that? He knew what she meant, not the seat, not the argument, the holding back, the swallowing fire until it became language safe enough for others to hear. Ethan looked toward the window. Sunlight burned across the wing. The clouds below looked soft enough to rest on, but he knew better. From up here, even storms could look peaceful. More than I can count, he said. Helen's eyes softened. I'm sorry. Ethan nodded, but his gaze stayed outside. I used to think success would end it, he said. I thought if I worked hard enough, dressed well enough, spoke carefully enough, built something real enough, there would be a point where I stopped having to prove the obvious. He gave a small breath, not quite a laugh. There isn't. Helen said nothing. That was wisdom, too. Some truths do not need to be filled with comfort right away. Ethan continued. But I've also learned something. People can take a moment from you. They can embarrass you. They can test your patience. They can make a room question you. But they cannot decide what you do with the truth afterward. Helen nodded slowly. That is a hard lesson. Yes, Ethan said, but a useful one. In the galley, Laura Mitchell heard parts of the conversation. Not every word. Enough. She stood with a coffee pot in her hand, frozen beside the counter. Her reflection stared back at her from the metal cabinet door, brown hair tight in a bun. Lipstick still perfect, uniform clean, face composed, but she did not feel composed. She felt split open. She remembered Brandon Hayes boarding late on other flights, laughing with crew, complaining about meal choices, expecting upgrades that were not available. She remembered managers telling staff not to take care of him because he spent a lot of money. She remembered learning, without anyone saying it plainly, that some customers were to be soothed and others were to be managed. That was the quiet training, the kind never written in manuals. Andrew Collins stepped into the galley and pulled the curtain halfway closed. You need to stop staring, he muttered. Laura looked at him. I was listening. That's worse. She lowered the coffee pot. Andrew, we were wrong. He exhaled sharply. Not now. Yes, now. His eyes flicked toward the cabin. Do you have any idea how fast something like this can turn into a company investigation? Laura's voice dropped. It should. Andrew stared at her. For a second, anger flashed across his face. Then fear moved underneath it. You're emotional. No, Laura said. I'm awake. The word surprised even her. Andrew leaned closer. Listen to me. We did not remove him. He kept the seat. The issue was resolved. Laura shook her head. No, it was contained. That is not the same thing. Andrew looked toward Ethan's row. He was difficult. Laura's eyes sharpened. He was clear. Andrew said nothing, because somewhere inside he knew she was right. But knowing did not mean he was ready to admit it. Not yet. Admitting it would mean looking at the part of himself that had cared more about controlling the cabin than protecting a passenger's dignity. And that was not an easy mirror. Back in seat 3C, Brandon Hayes had finished drafting his complaint. He read it over with tight satisfaction. Summit Ridge failed to honor my long-standing profile preference. Crew allowed an aggressive passenger to disrupt boarding. Premium loyalty was not recognized. He stopped at the word aggressive. His thumb hovered. For the first time, the word felt unstable. Had Ethan been aggressive? He replayed the scene in his mind. Ethan sitting still, Ethan asking questions, Ethan refusing to move. Brandon could not find yelling, could not find threats, could not find anything close to what he had written. He deleted aggressive, then stared at the blank space. His face hardened. He typed difficult instead. It felt safer, less false, still false, but easier to live with. A chime sounded through the cabin. The captain's voice followed, calm and professional. Ladies and gentlemen, we're currently cruising at 34,000 feet. We expect to arrive in San Diego a few minutes behind schedule. Weather is clear on arrival. We appreciate your patience during boarding. During boarding, another soft phrase. Ethan looked up at the speaker. Helen did too. Sarah Klein in row 3 glanced at her phone, where the video sat saved but unsent. She had not posted it. Not yet. She did not want to turn a man's pain into entertainment. But she also did not want the airline to bury it under words like misunderstanding. She leaned forward again. Ethan, she said carefully. He turned. I don't want to put anything online without your permission, Sarah said. But I want you to know I have the recording. If they try to lie about what happened, you won't be alone. Ethan studied her. There was something deeply American in that sentence. Not the loud kind. Not flag pins and slogans. The better kind. A stranger choosing witness over comfort. Thank you, he said, for not posting it without asking. Sarah nodded. I figured you should own your own story. That sentence touched something in him. Own your own story. For years, Ethan had built systems that helped corporations run cleaner, faster, smarter. But in moments like this, no technology mattered more than one human being deciding another person's dignity was not public property. He gave Sarah a small nod. I appreciate that. Sarah sat back. Her hands stopped trembling. Near the front, Laura stepped out of the galley and approached Ethan again. This time she was not holding a tray, not a coffee pot, not a tablet, just herself. Andrew watched from behind the curtain, tense and silent. Laura stopped beside seat 1A. Mr. Caldwell, she said. Ethan looked up. Helen earned slightly. Sarah watched from row 3. Laura clasped her hands in front of her. Her knuckles had gone pale. I need to say something, she continued, and I understand if you don't want to respond. Ethan's expression remained unreadable. Laura swallowed. I was wrong. The cabin seemed to quiet around the words. Not everyone heard them, but enough did. Laura's voice shook, but she did not stop. I should have verified the seat assignment properly. I should not have treated Mr. Hayes' preference like it mattered more than your confirmed ticket. And I should not have used the word flexibility when what we were asking you to do was unfair. Andrew's face darkened in the galley. Brandon looked up, stunned. Laura kept her eyes on Ethan. I'm sorry. The apology was not perfect. It did not fix everything. It did not erase the public pressure, the threat of security, or the way the room had turned Ethan into a question mark. But it was real enough to cost her something. Ethan saw that. He took a slow breath. Thank you for saying that. Laura's eyes glistened, but she blinked it back. I know it doesn't undo it. No, Ethan said, it doesn't. The words were firm. Laura nodded. Ethan continued, but it matters that you chose to say it before someone made you. Laura looked down. That landed deeply, because it was true. A forced apology protects the institution. A voluntary one begins to repair the person. Helen gave Laura a small nod. Not forgiveness exactly, more like recognition of a first step. Laura returned to the galley with a different walk, not lighter, but more honest. Andrew met her behind the curtain.
What did you just do?
Laura looked at him. The thing we should have done at the gate. Andrew's mouth tightened. You may have just admitted fault in front of witnesses. Laura's voice was quiet. Maybe fault needed admitting. Andrew stared at her, and for the first time that day, he seemed smaller than his uniform. At seat 1A, Ethan closed his notebook. He did not smile. He did not celebrate. But something in his breathing changed. Not relief, not victory. Something closer to balance. The first repair had not come from power. It had come from conscience. That mattered. Still, he knew the larger truth remained. One apology from one flight attendant would not fix a culture that had trained people to move the quieter person, pressure the less familiar face, and reward the loudest sense of entitlement. This had happened on an airplane, but it was bigger than an airplane. It was a boardroom, a hotel lobby, a restaurant host stand, a mortgage office, a school hallway. Every place where one person was asked to shrink so another could stay comfortable. Ethan looked once more at the line in his notebook. Reason given, flexibility. Then underneath it, he added 3 words. Actual reason, assumption. The pen stopped, the plane flew on. And far below them, somewhere under the white clouds, the world that had taught people to make those assumptions waited to be answered. The descent into San Diego began with a soft drop in the engines. It was almost gentle, a slow lowering through pale afternoon light. The clouds broke apart beneath the wing, revealing the Pacific in long silver strips. The coastline appeared like a promise. Blue water, white surf, roads curving through neighborhoods where people were finishing work, picking up groceries, waiting at school parking lots, living lives untouched by what had happened in seat 1A. But Ethan Caldwell knew better. Nothing that happened inside a closed space truly stayed there. Not when it revealed something larger. He looked down at the city and felt the familiar heaviness return. The flight was almost over. That should have brought relief. Instead, it sharpened everything. The closer they came to landing, the more the incident became permanent. A memory with names, a time, a place, witnesses, and consequences. Laura Mitchell walked through the cabin, collecting glasses before landing. When she reached Ethan, her movements were careful but no longer cold. Can I take that for you? She asked. Ethan handed her the empty water glass. Thank you. She paused, as if the simple courtesy hurt. You're welcome, she said. Then she moved on. Andrew Collins avoided looking at Ethan altogether. He performed his final checks with clipped efficiency, seat backs, tray tables, bags under seats. His voice remained professional, but his face had lost its earlier confidence. He had already started building his report in his head. Passenger refused requested seat adjustment, ground supervisor involved. Situation resolved without removal, no further incident. Clean, safe, incomplete. That was how institutions protected themselves, not always through obvious lies, sometimes through careful omissions, through words that sounded neutral while hiding who had been pressured and why. Ethan knew that language well. He had seen contracts written that way, public statements, human resources summaries, customer service replies, the kind of language that could drain the blood out of a living moment and leave behind a polished skeleton. He opened his notebook again. Report risk, sanitized language likely. He underlined sanitized once. Across the aisle, Helen Parker leaned back as the plane trembled lightly in the descending air. Her hands rested in her lap. She looked tired now, not sleepy, tired in the spirit. She turned to Ethan. Will you file a complaint? Ethan looked at the page before closing the notebook. Yes. Helen nodded. Good. He studied her. You sound certain. I am, she said, but not because I want anyone destroyed. That made Ethan turn fully toward her. Helen's voice softened. I spent my whole life in schools. When a child did something wrong, the worst thing we could do was pretend nothing happened. That teaches everyone the wrong lesson. The child learns there are no consequences. The child who was hurt learns their pain is inconvenient. and everybody watching learned silence is safer than honesty. The plane dipped slightly. A few passengers gripped their armrests. Helen continued after the movement settled. Accountability is not cruelty. It is how people learn to live together. Ethan let the words sit. Accountability is not cruelty. He wrote them down. Helen watched him do it and gave the smallest smile. My husband used to say I sounded like a school board meeting, even at breakfast. Ethan smiled too, but only a little. Sounds like he was lucky. He was, she said. Then after a beat, so was I. For the first time since the incident began, the pain in her face opened into something tender. Grief, but healed around the edges. The kind older people carry with quiet grace. Ethan looked away, giving her privacy without turning cold. Behind them, Sarah Klein leaned into the aisle again. Ethan, she said, I wrote my email on a napkin. If you need the video, just reach out. She held it forward. Ethan took the folded napkin carefully. Thank you, Sarah. I mean it, she said. Not just because of what happened, because of how you handled it. Ethan looked at her. Sarah's eyes glistened. My grandson is mixed, she said quietly. He is 16, smart kid, kind, but last month a store manager followed him around like he was stealing. He came home and asked his mother what he had done wrong. Her voice broke on the last word. Ethan's face softened. Sarah shook her head. He had not done anything wrong. He was buying gum. The cabin around them blurred for a moment. Not visually, emotionally. The story reached beyond the aircraft just as Ethan had known it would. A boy buying gum. A man sitting in first class. Different places. Same question. Why do I have to prove I am not a problem? Ethan folded the napkin and placed it in his jacket pocket. Tell your grandson something from me, he said. Sarah nodded. Tell him other people's suspicion is not his identity. Sarah covered her mouth with one hand. Helen closed her eyes. Ethan continued, slower now. And tell him he does not have to carry every insult alone. Some of us are still standing. Some of us are still pushing doors open. Sarah nodded again, unable to speak. In seat 3C, Brandon Hayes heard it. He did not want to hear it, but he did. For the first time all flight, his complaint email looked ugly to him. Not wrong in a legal sense. Worse. Small. He stared at the draft on his phone. Premium loyalty was not recognized. He read the sentence again. Then he looked toward Ethan. The man had been humiliated and had still found a way to comfort a stranger about her grandson. Brandon felt a heat rise in his neck. Shame, maybe, or the first edge of it. He locked his phone without sending the email. Not repentance, not yet, but a crack. Sometimes that is where change begins. The captain announced final approach. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing shortly. Please make sure your seatbelts are fastened. We appreciate you flying Summit Ridge. The wheels lowered with a deep mechanical groan. The cabin lights dimmed slightly. Laura took her jump seat near the front, facing the passengers. Her eyes landed on Ethan once, then moved to the floor. She looked shaken, not because she feared punishment, though she did, but because she had seen how quickly ordinary work habits could become moral failure. Andrew sat opposite her, staring straight ahead. Robert Fletcher was no longer on the plane, but his presence remained in the record Ethan had written. The aircraft crossed over water, then land. Houses flashed below. Cars moved along freeways. The runway rushed up. Touchdown came hard. The tires screamed against the pavement. The cabin rocked. A few people exhaled at once. Then came the long reverse roar of the engines, pushing everyone forward against their seatbelts. The plane slowed, turned, rolled toward the gate. No one clapped. No one joked. When the seatbelt sign finally switched off, passengers stood slowly. Overhead bins opened. Bags came down. The normal sounds returned, but softer now, as if everyone understood they were leaving more than a flight. They were leaving a scene where they had been tested. Some had failed. Some had watched. Some had spoken. Ethan stayed seated while others gathered their things. He was in no hurry. He had spent a lifetime learning that dignity did not rush just because others were uncomfortable. Helen stood and reached for her small suitcase. Ethan rose immediately. Let me help you. She almost refused. Then she let him. He lifted the bag down and handed it to her. Thank you, she said. No, thank you. She held his gaze. Do not let them make this smaller than it was. I won't. Sarah passed by next. She touched the back of Ethan's seat gently. Remember, you have my email. I will. Then Brandon approached from row 3. For a second, Ethan expected silence, or a glare, or nothing at all. Brandon stopped beside him. His face was tight, uncomfortable, stripped of swagger. "I should have sat in my seat," Brandon said. The words came out rough. Laura looked up from the front. Andrew froze. Ethan studied Brandon carefully. "Yes," Ethan said. "You should have." Brandon nodded once. "I'm not good at being told no." It was not an excuse. It was almost a confession. Ethan's voice stayed even. "That is something worth fixing." Brandon swallowed. "Yeah." Then he walked off the plane. No handshake, no grand redemption. Just a man stepping into the consequences of seeing himself clearly for the first time. Ethan collected his briefcase and carried on. As he reached the aircraft door, Laura stood there. "Mr. Caldwell," she said. He stopped. Her voice was low. "I'm going to file my report honestly." Andrew looked sharply at her. Ethan did not look away. "That would be the beginning of doing right," he said. Laura nodded, eyes wet but steady. "I know." Ethan stepped into the jet bridge. The air was warmer there. Still, metallic, faintly smelling of fuel and carpet cleaner. Behind him, the plane emptied. Ahead, the terminal waited with its noise, its rushing people, its bright signs and ordinary chaos. His phone buzzed before he reached the gate. A message from Michael Bennett. "Welcome home, boss. Phoenix documents are fully executed. Summit Ridge renewal packet also came in this afternoon. Want me to review tomorrow." Ethan stopped walking. Travelers flowed around him. A family hurried past with backpacks. A man in a Padres cap checked the arrivals board. Somewhere nearby, a woman laughed into her phone. Ethan stared at the message. Summit Ridge renewal packet. He looked back once through the jet bridge windows at the aircraft. Then he typed, "Review tonight. Full contract history. All service exceptions. All favors outside scope. No assumptions." A second later, Michael replied, "Understood. Is there a problem?" Ethan's thumb hovered. Then he wrote the truth. There was today. He slipped the phone into his pocket and walked toward the terminal, calm as ever. But the quiet had changed. The flight was over. The reckoning had just begun. By the time Ethan Caldwell reached his house in La Jolla, the sun had dropped low over the ocean. The sky was the color of copper and smoke. Waves folded against the rocks below the cliffs. The neighborhood was quiet in that polished Southern California way, where even the wind seemed careful around expensive glass and clean white walls. Ethan parked in the driveway and sat there for a moment with both hands on the steering wheel. He did not move. The engine ticked softly as it cooled. His phone sat face down in the cup holder. The house in front of him was lit from inside by warm lamps he had set on a timer. To anyone passing by, it looked peaceful, a successful man coming home. But success did not climb out of the car for him. It did not carry the weight out of his chest. It did not erase the sound of Laura Mitchell's voice telling him to move. It did not erase Brandon Hayes standing there, waiting for the world to correct itself in his favor. Ethan closed his eyes. For a few seconds, he let himself feel it. Not the polished version, not the professional version. The real one, the humiliation, the anger, the tiredness. He had been in rooms with senators, investors, federal auditors, and chief executives who controlled budgets larger than small cities. He had negotiated contracts under pressure that would have crushed lesser men. But a stranger with a tablet and a false smile had still managed to make him feel, for one sharp moment, like a boy being told he was in the wrong place. That was the part people did not understand. Prejudice did not always arrive shouting. Sometimes it arrived with company policy. Sometimes it arrived with a smile. Sometimes it asked for flexibility. Ethan opened his eyes. Then his phone buzzed. Michael Bennett. Ethan picked it up. "Tell me." Michael did not waste time with greetings. He had worked with Ethan for 11 years and knew his voice well enough to hear trouble under calm. "I pulled the Summit Ridge agreement," Michael said. "Current master service contract, 3 active statements of work, 2 pending renewals, and a proposed expansion amendment. The renewal packet came in at 4:26 this afternoon." Ethan looked toward the darkening ocean. "And the service history?" Michael paused. "That's where it gets interesting." Ethan said nothing. Michael continued. "Contractually, they're entitled to standard enterprise support. Priority 2 response within 4 business hours. Priority 1 response within 1 hour. After hours escalation only for outages affecting active flight operations." Ethan already knew this, But he let Michael say it. And what have we been giving them? Michael exhaled softly, white glove support. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Define it. Dedicated senior engineers, even though they don't pay for dedicated coverage. After hours response on non-outage requests, weekend patch reviews, expedited analytics customization, emergency access to the crew scheduling team during weather events, even when the issue was caused by their own internal data entry failures. He paused again. And we did all of that without billing overage. The ocean shifted under the last light. Ethan's voice remained flat. How long? Almost 3 years. Ethan leaned back against the headrest. Why? Michael's answer came slower now. Relationship management. They were considered strategic. You approved some of the early exceptions yourself when they were recovering from that holiday outage. I approved temporary support. I know. Temporary is not 3 years. No, Michael said, it is not. The silence between them was heavy but clean. Neither man filled it with excuses. Michael finally asked, what happened on the flight? Ethan looked at his own reflection in the windshield. The man looking back at him seemed composed, almost untouched. That was not the truth. They tried to move me out of my seat for a frequent flyer. Michael went quiet. Ethan continued. Confirmed first class, seat 1A. My ticket was valid. His assigned seat was 3C. He wanted mine. The crew pressured me. Ground operations came on board. Security was implied. Michael's voice changed. Ethan, I kept the seat. I figured you did. There were witnesses. Some video. Good. Ethan opened the car door and stepped out. The evening air was cool, salted by the ocean. He walked toward the house slowly, phone at his ear. I want every courtesy outside the contract stopped immediately. Michael did not answer right away. Then he said, you want standard enforcement. I want compliance with the agreement as written. That will hurt them. No, Ethan said, unlocking the front door. It will show them what they actually bought. He stepped inside. The house was quiet, wooden floors, white walls, a framed photograph of his father on a bookshelf near the entry. The picture showed Walter Caldwell in his postal uniform, standing beside a mail truck in Baltimore, smiling like the world had not worn him down, though Ethan knew it had tried. Ethan looked at the photo as Michael spoke. If we pull informal priority, their operations team will feel it within days. They still get what they pay for.
Yes.
But they're used to more. That is the problem. Michael understood then. Not all of it, but enough. This is not revenge, Michael said. No, Ethan replied. Revenge is emotional. This is correction. He set his briefcase on the kitchen counter. Michael's voice lowered. Do you want legal involved? Not yet. Contract review first. Document everything. Every exception. Every unpaid escalation. Every weekend call. Every internal note that says Summit Ridge was prioritized because of relationship value. Understood. And Michael? Yes? No one at Caldwell Systems is to mention what happened on the flight unless I authorize it. Michael paused. You're not going public? Not tonight. Why not? Ethan looked toward the photograph of his father again. Because public humiliation should never be the first tool, just as it was used against you. Michael was quiet. Ethan continued. We do this clean. We do this right. We do this in a way my father would recognize. Michael's voice softened. Then I'll have the report ready by morning. Tonight. Another pause. Then Michael said, tonight. The call ended. Ethan placed the phone on the counter and stood in the stillness of his kitchen. For a moment, he was not a CEO. He was simply a man in his own home, carrying the day in his bones. He poured water into a glass but did not drink it. He loosened his jacket, removed his shoes. Then he sat at the kitchen island, opened his notebook, and read through what he had written on the plane. Names, times, words, flexibility, assumption, witnesses. He turned to a new page. At the top, he wrote one sentence. Respect is also an operating system. He stared at it for a long time. Then he underlined it. Across the city, in a small hotel room near San Diego International Airport, Laura Mitchell sat on the edge of her bed in her uniform. She had not changed. Her suitcase was open on the luggage rack. Her shoes sat beside the bed. The television was on with the sound muted. A local news anchor smiled silently from the screen, reporting on something unrelated, something ordinary. Laura held her phone in both hands. On the screen was the incident report form. Her thumb hovered over the first box, passenger seating dispute. That was the option Andrew had told her to choose. She could still hear him in the crew shuttle after landing. Keep it simple. Do not speculate. Do not use words like bias or discrimination. We resolved it. That is what matters. Laura had stared out the shuttle window while he spoke. The airport lights had passed over her face in pale strips. What matters? The phrase had followed her into the hotel. Now she looked at the empty report box and felt the weight of the day pressing against her ribs. She thought of Ethan's face when she apologized. Calm, hurt, tired, but not cruel. She thought of Helen Parker saying the wrong man was under pressure. She thought of Sarah Klein offering the video. She thought of Brandon saying Ethan made it about race, and Ethan explaining, without raising his voice, what patterns do to a person over time. Laura swallowed. Then she selected other. In the description field, she began to type. Passenger Ethan Caldwell was assigned seat 1A with valid documentation. Another passenger, Brandon Hayes, assigned seat 3C, requested or expected seat 1A due to preference and frequent flyer status. I approached Mr. Caldwell and asked him to move. In hindsight, the request was inappropriate. The seat map supported Mr. Caldwell's assignment. Crew pressure escalated the situation unnecessarily. Her hands shook. She kept typing. I used the word flexibility. That word did not accurately describe the situation. Mr. Caldwell was being asked to give up a seat he had purchased, so another passenger could be accommodated based on preference. She stopped. Her eyes burned. Then she wrote the final sentence. I believe our handling of this incident reflected biased assumptions about who should be accommodated and who could be pressured. Laura stared at the sentence. It looked dangerous. It looked true. She submitted the report before fear could talk her out of it. Then she set the phone down and covered her face with both hands. She did not cry loudly, just once. A broken breath, and then another. Because sometimes the first honest act after doing wrong is not healing. It is pain. At the same time, in a downtown operations office in Denver, Summit Ridge's late shift support manager, Aaron Pike, frowned at his dashboard. A non-critical analytics request from Summit Ridge had been routed into the standard queue. That never happened. He clicked the ticket. Crew utilization adjustment. Requested expedited review. Status. Standard priority. Aaron leaned closer. He refreshed the screen. Nothing changed. He opened another ticket. Maintenance routing optimization. Standard priority. Another. Pilot schedule variance. Standard priority. His frown deepened. He reached for the phone and called the Caldwell Systems support line. A calm voice answered. Caldwell Systems Enterprise Support. This is Priya. How may I help you? This is Aaron Pike with Summit Ridge Airlines. I think some of our tickets are routing incorrectly. Priya's keyboard clicked softly. One moment, please. Aaron tapped his pen against the desk. Priya returned. Your tickets are routing according to your current service agreement. That can't be right. We usually get expedited review. I understand. Your contract includes expedited response for Priority 1 operational outages only. The tickets you referenced are not classified as Priority 1 outages. Aaron sat up straighter. We have a long-standing relationship with your team. Priya's voice remained polite. Yes, sir. And we value that relationship. We are following the terms of the agreement. Aaron looked across the office at the wall of live flight data. For the first time that night, he felt the floor move beneath something he thought was solid. Can you escalate this to Michael Bennett? I can submit a request. A request? Yes, sir. Aaron's mouth went dry. What changed? Priya paused. It was only half a second, but he heard it. Nothing has changed in your contract, she said. The line went quiet. Aaron understood the difference. Nothing had changed in the contract. Something had changed outside it. Back in La Jolla, Ethan finally drank the water he had poured. His phone buzzed again. Michael had sent one file, Summit Ridge Service Exception Summary. Ethan opened it. The list was longer than he expected. Much longer. He scrolled slowly. After hours support, unbilled escalation, executive courtesy routing, dedicated engineer assigned without contract addendum, emergency weekend call with no outage designation. Another. He stopped scrolling and closed his eyes. This was not just a customer relationship. It was a pattern of entitlement written in operational language. He opened his eyes and typed a reply. Effective immediately, no informal exceptions. Written contract only, no hostility, no delay, no punishment. Just terms. He sent it. Then he added one more message. Respect must be mutual to remain generous. Outside, the ocean moved in darkness. Inside, first quiet consequence reached Summit Ridge Airlines. Not like thunder, like a door closing softly, but firmly. And on the other side of that door stood Ethan Caldwell, no longer waiting to be recognized before he was respected. By morning, Summit Ridge Airlines had begun to feel the difference between partnership and dependency. It started with small things. A scheduling analyst in Denver submitted a crew pairing adjustment and expected the usual quick fix from Caldwell Systems. Instead, the ticket entered the standard queue. A maintenance coordinator in Charlotte requested an overnight optimization review and received a polite response with the contracted response window. A regional operations manager in Atlanta asked for an engineer by name, the one who always helped during weather disruptions. The answer came back clean and simple. That engineer is not assigned to the Summit Ridge account under the current agreement. No anger, no threat, no drama, just the contract. By 8 in the morning, Summit Ridge's operations floor had changed temperature. Not physically. The air conditioning still hummed above rows of desks. Blue flight maps still glowed across the wall. Headsets still blinked with incoming calls. But something invisible had tightened. People were used to shortcuts. Now the shortcuts were gone. Aaron Pike stood near the center console, with a paper cup of coffee going cold in his hand. He had slept less than 3 hours. His shirt collar was crooked. His eyes moved between the dashboard and the message thread with Caldwell Systems support. He clicked refresh. Nothing changed. Standard priority. Standard priority. Standard priority. He muttered under his breath, "This is not normal." A younger analyst named Chloe Ramirez looked up from her monitor.
What's going on?
Aaron rubbed his forehead. Caldwell stopped fast-tracking us. Chloe frowned. Can they do that? Aaron turned to her. They're not stopping service. That's the problem. She did not understand at first. Then she did. They're just following the contract. Aaron gave a humorless laugh. Exactly. Across the room, the director of network operations, Paul Mercer, stepped out of a glass conference room with his phone pressed to his ear. "No, I understand what the agreement says," Paul said, keeping his voice low and sharp. "I'm asking why the agreement suddenly matters this morning." He listened, his jaw hardened. Then he looked across the floor at Aaron. "Get legal in here," Paul said. Aaron pointed to himself. Paul nodded once. Fast. Sharp now. At the same time in San Diego, Caldwell Systems was already awake and moving. The company's headquarters sat in a clean, steel and glass building not far from the harbor. The lobby was simple. No marble statues. No wall of awards screaming for attention. Just polished concrete floors, soft light, and a quiet sign behind the front desk. Caldwell Systems. Build what holds. Ethan Caldwell had chosen that phrase himself, not because it sounded clever, because it sounded true. He arrived at 7:15, carrying the same leather briefcase he had taken on the flight. The security guard, a retired Navy veteran named Frank, looked up from the desk. "Morning, Mr. Caldwell." "Morning, Frank." Frank studied his face for half a second. "You all right, sir?" Ethan stopped. Frank was not being nosy. He had worked the front desk for 6 years. He had seen Ethan after difficult board meetings, failed acquisitions, family funerals, and late-night crisis calls. He knew the difference between tired and burdened. Ethan gave him the truth. "Not yet." Frank nodded. "Then I hope the day gets honest." Ethan looked at him, then gave a small smile. "That's the plan." Upstairs, the executive conference room was already full. Michael Bennett stood near the screen, sleeves rolled up, a stack of printed summaries on the table. Priya Shah from Enterprise Support sat beside him with a laptop open. Marissa Cole from Legal had a yellow pad filled with notes. 2 senior engineers sat at the far end, quiet and serious. No one was laughing. No one was guessing. They had read enough by sunrise to understand this was not a normal account review. Ethan entered, and the room stood. He did not ask them to. They just did. "Sit," he said. Chairs moved softly. Michael handed him a folder. Full summary. 3 years of service exceptions. We separated paid obligations from informal courtesy support. Marissa reviewed the contract language. Ethan opened the folder. The first page was a timeline. Weather disruption support. No overage billed. Manual crew system review. Outside scope. Weekend configuration fix. Non-emergency. Executive escalation bypass. No contract basis. Dedicated senior engineer. Not included. Ethan turned page after page. The room waited. Finally, he closed the folder. How many hours? Priya answered. Roughly 1,400 support hours outside contract scope over the last 3 years. The number sat heavily in the room. Ethan looked at Michael. And billed? Michael's mouth tightened. None. Marissa leaned forward. To be clear, that was a business choice. Not illegal, not improper by itself. But it created an expectation without compensation and without written boundaries. Ethan nodded. That ends today. One of the engineers, a soft-spoken man named Ben Wallace, shifted in his chair. Sir, can I ask something? Ethan looked at him. Go ahead. If we stop the informal help all at once, their teams will be under pressure. Not passengers directly, but dispatchers, schedulers, maintenance planners, people on the ground who didn't do anything wrong. That mattered. Ethan was glad someone said it. He turned slightly toward Ben. You're right, the room quieted. Ethan continued. We do not punish frontline workers for executive culture. We do not delay safety issues. We do not slow operational outages. We do not let aircraft, crews, or passengers become leverage. Ever. Ben nodded, relieved. Ethan's voice grew firmer. But we also do not let our generosity become something others feel entitled to while they treat people without dignity. No one spoke. That was the line. Clear, human, hard. Michael stepped in. So the policy is this. All safety-related and active operational outages receive contractually required support, and if there is any doubt, we err on the side of safety. Everything else routes according to the written agreement. No executive bypass. No named engineer request unless the contract allows it. No unpaid weekend work. Marissa added, and every exception request must be written. Ethan looked at Priya. Support tone stays respectful. Always, Priya said. No sarcasm, no passive aggression, no punishment language. We are not mirroring what happened to me. Priya's expression softened. What did happen to you? The question was gentle. The room became still. Ethan looked at the people around the table. People who had helped build his company. People who knew him as demanding, fair, exacting. Some knew pieces of his past. Few had seen the full weight of it. He could have skipped the story. He did not. Yesterday, he said, on a Summit Ridge flight from Dallas-Fort Worth to San Diego, I was asked to give up my confirmed first-class seat for a frequent flyer who preferred it. My ticket was valid. His assigned seat was also in first class. The crew pressured me. A ground supervisor implied escalation. The reason given was flexibility. Priya lowered her eyes. Ben's jaw tightened. Marissa stopped writing. Michael already knew, but hearing it in the room made it sharper. Ethan continued. I kept the seat. A flight attendant later apologized. There were witnesses, but the issue is not just what happened to me. It is what the incident revealed. He tapped the folder once. This account has been receiving unearned flexibility for years. Extra care, extra time, extra access. And yesterday, when one of their passengers asked for unfair flexibility at my expense, their staff assumed I was the one who should give way. The room absorbed that. Michael looked down at the table. Priya's voice was quiet. They valued the familiar customer more than the rightful one. Ethan looked at her. Yes. Marissa capped her pen. Then we document, we enforce, and we give them a chance to respond properly. Ethan nodded. Exactly. His phone buzzed on the table. Michael glanced at the screen. Summit Ridge. Rebecca Turner. Ethan did not pick it up. Rebecca Turner was Summit Ridge's Senior Vice President of Customer Operations, 46. Smart, controlled, known for fixing problems before they became public. She had negotiated parts of the renewal packet personally. The phone stopped ringing. Then Michael's phone buzzed, then Marissa's. Then the conference room line lit up. A red light blinking in the center of the table, once, twice, 3 times. No one moved. Ethan looked at the light, then at Michael. Let it go to voicemail. The room stayed silent as the ringing continued. Finally, it stopped. A few seconds later, Michael's laptop chimed. He opened a message. His eyebrows lifted. What does it say? Ethan asked. Michael read aloud. Urgent request. Summit Ridge would like immediate executive discussion regarding recent support routing changes and possible service continuity concerns. Rebecca Turner, Paul Mercer, and legal counsel available at your earliest convenience. Ethan leaned back. Service continuity concerns. Marissa's expression sharpened. That's careful language. Yes, Ethan said. It is. Priya looked at him. What do we tell them? Ethan stood and walked to the window. Below, morning traffic moved along the street. People crossed at the light. A delivery driver carried boxes into a cafe. The ordinary world continued, unaware that a corporate relationship worth millions was shifting because of one seat, one assumption, one refusal to be moved. Ethan turned back to the room. Tell them Caldwell Systems is operating fully within the current agreement. Tell them all safety and active operational issues remain covered. Tell them we are available for a scheduled executive review tomorrow morning. Michael nodded. And if they push for today? Ethan's eyes were steady. Then remind them that immediate executive access is not included in their current support tier. A flicker passed through the room. Not amusement, recognition. The contract had become a mirror, and Summit Ridge was about to see its own reflection. Michael typed the response. Marissa watched him send it. Priya closed her laptop halfway, then stopped. Mr. Caldwell, she said. Ethan looked at her. My parents ran a motel in New Mexico when I was growing up. They used to say, you learn who people are by how they treat the desk clerk, not the owner. Ethan's face softened. They were right. Priya nodded toward the folder. Yesterday they thought you were the desk clerk. Ethan looked down at the Summit Ridge file. No, he said quietly. They thought the desk clerk could be moved. The room went still again, because that was the lesson. Not that powerful people should be treated better once recognized, but that no person should have to reveal power to receive respect. Ethan picked up the folder. Let's get to work. By noon, Summit Ridge had received the message. By 12:15, 3 executives were in a conference room in Denver with the door closed. By 12:20, Rebecca Turner had read Laura Mitchell's honest report. By 12:23, she stopped speaking. Because the words on the screen were simple, clear, impossible to bury. Based assumptions, inappropriate request, confirmed seat, passenger pressured. Rebecca sat back slowly, her face pale beneath the conference room lights. Paul Mercer stood by the window, arms crossed. This is bad, he said. Rebecca looked at him. No, she said, this is worse than bad. Her voice dropped. This is true. Rebecca Turner read Laura Mitchell's report 3 times before she looked up. The Denver conference room felt too bright, too clean, too exposed. Morning sun poured through the glass wall and spread across the table, touching laptops, coffee cups, legal pads, and the faces of people who suddenly understood that this was not a routine vendor issue. It was not a routing problem. It was not a ticket queue problem. It was not even only a passenger complaint. It was a mirror. Rebecca sat at the head of the table, one hand resting near her keyboard. She was 46, sharp, disciplined, and known inside Summit Ridge as the person who could turn a crisis into a statement before lunch. She had saved the airline from storms before, weather meltdowns, crew shortages, holiday delays. A baggage system collapsed in Seattle that had nearly gone national. But this felt different. Weather had no intent. Software had no pride. This did. Paul Mercer paced near the window with his arms crossed. His tie was already loose. He had come from network operations and still carried the energy of a man who wanted to solve everything with urgency and pressure. This report should have gone through legal before submission, he said. Rebecca looked at him slowly. Why? Paul stopped pacing. Because it uses loaded language. Rebecca tapped the screen. It uses accurate language. Across the table, Denise Harlow from corporate counsel removed her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. The word bias creates exposure. Rebecca turned to her. So does bias. Denise did not answer. That was the problem with truth in corporate rooms. Everyone could recognize it. But the first instinct was often to measure the risk of admitting it. Rebecca hated that instinct in other people. She hated it more when she felt it in herself. A junior executive named Kyle Brenner shifted in his chair. Do we know who this passenger is? Rebecca looked down at the report. Ethan Caldwell. Kyle frowned. Caldwell as in Caldwell Systems? No one answered right away. Paul stopped moving. Denise put her glasses back on. Rebecca's silence was the answer. Kyle sat back. Oh, that one small word changed the room. Because Ethan Caldwell was no ordinary customer. He was the founder and chief executive of the software company Summit Ridge had leaned on for years. Not publicly, not proudly, but constantly. Caldwell Systems did not have its logo on Summit Ridge planes. Its name did not appear in the safety card or the app welcome screen. But deep beneath the surface, it helped move the airline's day. Crew scheduling, maintenance alerts, operational analytics, disruption recovery, the hidden bones of a complicated machine. And yesterday, Summit Ridge staff had looked at the man who built part of that machine and treated him like an inconvenience to be moved. Paul's voice dropped.
Did the crew know who he was?
Rebecca turned toward him. That question is exactly the problem. Paul blinked. Rebecca leaned forward. If they had known he was Ethan Caldwell, would they have treated him differently? No one spoke. Rebecca nodded once. Then we already know what we need to know. The conference room phone rang. Everyone looked at it. Rebecca pressed the button. This is Rebecca. A woman's voice came through the speaker.
Tight.
Controlled. It was Janet Mills, Summit Ridge's Vice President of Client Technology. Rebecca, I'm joining with Operations and Vendor Management. We need to talk about Caldwell immediately. Rebecca closed her eyes for half a second. Go ahead. Janet did not waste time. They are enforcing the contract exactly as written. No informal escalation, no direct engineer routing, no weekend courtesy reviews. We have multiple teams backed up on non-critical but time-sensitive items. Paul cut in.
Are any flights at risk?
No active safety risk, Janet said. No cancellations tied to it. But operational efficiency is already taking a hit. The problem is not that they're failing us. The problem is that they are doing precisely what we agreed to. That landed harder than an accusation. Denise leaned toward the speaker. Have they breached anything? No. Delayed any priority one support? No. Refused required services? No. Rebecca stared at the wall. There it was. Clean. Unassailable. A consequence without a violation. Janet continued. And I just learned the renewal packet is pending with Caldwell leadership. If this relationship cools now, we have a major problem. Paul looked at Rebecca. We need Ethan on the phone today. Rebecca shook her head. They offered tomorrow morning. Tomorrow is too late. No, Rebecca said. Yesterday was too late. The room went silent. Even Paul looked away. On the other end of the call, Janet exhaled. What happened yesterday? Rebecca looked at Laura's report again. Her voice changed when she answered. One of our crews pressured Ethan Caldwell to give up his confirmed first-class seat for a frequent flyer who preferred it. Janet said nothing. Rebecca continued. His ticket was valid. The other passenger had another first-class seat. Our staff escalated the pressure. Ground operations got involved. Security was implied. The speaker crackled softly. Then Janet said, Dear God. No one corrected her. In a hotel room miles away, Laura Mitchell sat at a small desk with a paper cup of coffee she had not touched. Her phone had not stopped buzzing since morning. Andrew had texted twice. Call me, then. You should not have submitted that report without talking to me. Then nothing. The nothing was worse. Laura stared at the curtains, half open to a view of a parking lot and a strip of pale California sky. She had slept badly. When she did sleep, she dreamed of seat 1A. Not Ethan's face, the seat itself. Empty, waiting like a question. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was an internal notification. Incident report received. Pending review, she swallowed. A knock came at her door. Laura froze. Another knock. Laura?
It's Andrew.
She stood slowly. Every part of her wanted to pretend she was not there. But she had spent enough of the previous day hiding behind procedure. She opened the door. Andrew Collins stood in the hallway wearing jeans and a Summit Ridge polo. Without the uniform jacket, he looked less authoritative, more human, more tired. His eyes moved over her face. You look awful. Laura gave a dry breath. Good morning to you too. He stepped inside without asking. Then stopped as if realizing old habits did not belong in this room. Can I come in? Laura looked at him. You already did. He nodded, embarrassed.
Right.
She left the door open. That choice was not lost on him. Andrew stood near the bed, hands on his hips.
Why did you write that?
Laura leaned against the desk. Because it happened, you used the word biased.
Yes.
You understand what that does to the rest of us? Laura's face tightened.
The rest of us? You know what I mean.
No, she said. I don't think I do anymore. Andrew rubbed his jaw. We were managing a difficult boarding issue. Laura shook her head. We created one. He refused a reasonable request. He refused an unfair request. Andrew looked toward the open door, lowering his voice. Laura. No, she said, do not use that tone. I heard it yesterday. You used it on him too. That struck him. He stepped back. For a moment, the hallway noise filled the room. A rolling suitcase passed by. A housekeeper's cart squeaked somewhere near the elevator. Ordinary sounds around a conversation that was anything but ordinary. Andrew sat on the edge of the bed. His anger drained just enough to reveal fear. You think I'm a bad person? Laura looked at him for a long time. I think you made a bad choice. He stared at the carpet. That feels worse. It should. His head lifted. She softened, but not too much. Andrew, if feeling bad is the price of seeing clearly, then pay it. Do not make someone else pay it for you. He looked away again. Laura's own voice trembled now. I have been asking myself the same thing all night. Why did I go to him instead of telling Brandon to sit in 3C? Why did I accept Brandon's expectation as the thing to manage? Why did Ethan's calm make him easier to pressure? Andrew had no answer. Laura did, because we thought he would take it. The room went still. That was the ugliest truth. Not hatred, convenience. The assumption that some people could be made smaller with less cost. Andrew covered his face with one hand. I didn't think of it that way. I know, Laura said. That is part of the problem. Back in Denver, Rebecca Turner ended the conference call and stood. We are not waiting until tomorrow. Paul looked up. Caldwell said tomorrow. I heard them. Then what are you doing? Rebecca gathered Laura's report, the service summary, and the renewal packet.
I'm going to San Diego.
Denise frowned. That may look reactive. Rebecca shot her a look. It is reactive. We are reacting to our own failure. Kyle shifted. What do you plan to say? Rebecca stopped at the door. The truth. Paul followed her into the hallway. Rebecca, wait. She turned. He lowered his voice. If we admit too much, we weaken our negotiating position. Rebecca stared at him. There was no anger in her face now, only disappointment. Paul, our negotiating position weakened the moment our people forgot the difference between a loyal customer and a rightful customer. He opened his mouth. She cut him off, and it collapsed completely when we became more worried about the contract than the man. Paul said nothing. Rebecca walked away. Her heels struck the polished floor with a steady rhythm. By mid-afternoon, Ethan Caldwell was in his office overlooking the harbor. He had spent the day in meetings, but his mind had remained clean and focused. Not cold, focused. Michael Bennett sat across from him with a tablet. Summit Ridge is escalating through every channel, Michael said. Vendor management, operations, legal. Rebecca Turner is flying here. Ethan looked up. Today? Her assistant requested an in-person meeting this evening. Ethan looked out the window. Boats moved through the harbor below. Small white wakes cut across blue water. The world looked calm from above. Most things did. Schedule it for tomorrow morning, Ethan said. Michael studied him. You sure?
Yes. You don't want to hear them tonight? No.
Michael waited. Ethan turned back. Today they are frightened. Tomorrow we find out whether they are honest. Michael nodded slowly. That's fair. Ethan's office phone rang. His assistant's voice came through. Mr. Caldwell, Helen Parker is on the line. She says it is not urgent. Ethan's expression changed. Put her through. A soft click. Then Helen's voice. Ethan? Mrs. Parker. Oh, please. Helen. He smiled faintly. Helen, are you all right? I am. I just wanted to make sure you were. Ethan leaned back. I'm getting there. Good. A pause. Then she said, I kept thinking about what happened, about all the people who saw it, about that young woman who recorded, about that flight attendant who apologized.
Yes.
I hope you remember that part too. Ethan was quiet. Helen continued. Do not let the worst people in the moment become the whole story. Some people failed you. Some people found their courage late. Some found it on time. That matters too. Ethan looked down at the notebook on his desk. The names were still there. Laura Mitchell, Sarah Klein, Helen Parker, Brandon Hayes, Andrew Collins, Robert Fletcher. Human beings, not symbols, not just villains and witnesses. Human beings making choices under pressure, some wrong, some right, some late. You're a good teacher, Ethan said. Helen laughed softly. Retired, not expired. This time Ethan truly smiled. No, Mom, definitely not. Her voice softened. Justice without humanity turns hard. Humanity without justice turns weak. You will need both. Ethan felt the words settle somewhere deep. I'll remember that. I believe you will. The call ended. Ethan sat still for a moment, the phone resting in his hand. Then Michael asked quietly, what did she say? Ethan looked at him. That we need both justice and humanity. Michael nodded. Sounds right. It does. Ethan closed the notebook. Tomorrow morning, Rebecca Turner gets the meeting. Michael stood. And the renewal? Ethan looked toward the harbor again. That depends on whether Summit Ridge wants a vendor to rescue them. He paused. Or a mirror to teach them. That evening, Rebecca Turner landed in San Diego and rode toward her hotel in silence. Her laptop bag rested beside her. Laura's report lay printed in her folder. She had read it again on the plane. One sentence would not leave her. I believe our handling of this incident reflected biased assumptions about who should be accommodated and who could be pressured. Rebecca looked out the car window as palm trees passed under streetlights. Who could be pressured? She thought of every customer service policy Summit Ridge had written around status, loyalty, premium experience, and frequent flyer value. She thought of the quiet hierarchy those words created. Some passengers were valued, some were managed, some were accommodated, some were moved. Her phone buzzed. Paul. She declined the call. For once, she did not want a strategy. She wanted silence. Because in the silence, she could still hear the questions she would have to answer in Ethan Caldwell's office the next morning. Not what can we do to save the contract. Not how do we reduce exposure. Not how do we contain the incident. The real question. What kind of company asks the wrong person to move, then calls it service? Rebecca closed her eyes. The car moved through the California night, and morning was coming fast. Morning arrived with a clean blue sky over San Diego, but inside Caldwell Systems, the air felt charged. Ethan Caldwell stood at the window of the executive conference room with his hands folded behind his back. Below him, the city was already awake. Cars moved along the waterfront. People carried coffee through crosswalks. Sunlight flashed off glass buildings and the slow water of the harbor. Behind him, the conference table had been prepared with quiet precision. Michael Bennett sat to Ethan's right, tablet open, expression unreadable. Marissa Cole from legal sat beside him with a slim folder and a yellow pad. Priya Shah joined by video from enterprise support, her face calm on the screen. No one spoke much. They did not need to. At 9 a.m, the receptionist called. Mr. Caldwell, Rebecca Turner is here, Ethan. Turn from the window. Send her up. Rebecca Turner entered 3 minutes later with no entourage. That was the first good sign. She wore a charcoal business suit and carried a leather folder, but she did not carry the usual corporate armor of false brightness. Her face was composed but tired. Her eyes told the truth first. She had not slept well. Ethan stood. Miss Turner, Mr. Caldwell. They shook hands. Her grip was firm, not performative, not soft with apology. Firm enough to say she understood this was not a social visit. Thank you for seeing me, she said. Please sit. Everyone sat. For a moment, the room held only small sounds, a chair settling, a pen touching paper, the faint hum of the video screen. Rebecca opened her folder, then closed it again. She looked directly at Ethan. I'm not going to begin with contract language. Michael glanced at Ethan. Ethan said nothing. Rebecca continued. What happened to you on our flight was wrong. The sentence landed cleanly, no cushion, no softening, no misunderstanding. Rebecca took a breath. You had a confirmed seat. Another passenger wanted it. Our crew treated his preference as more important than your paid assignment. Then our staff pressured you to solve a problem you did not create. Her voice stayed steady, but her eyes showed effort. That should not have happened. Ethan watched her carefully. He had heard apologies before. Some were written by lawyers. Some were polished by public relations teams until all the life had been removed. This one was different. It still had blood in it. Rebecca turned a page in her folder. I read Laura Mitchell's report. I read the preliminary statement from Andrew Collins. I reviewed Robert Fletcher's ground operations note. I also spoke with 2 passengers who contacted our customer relations team this morning. Helen Parker and Sarah Klein, Ethan thought. He did not interrupt. Rebecca's jaw tightened. The reports do not match. Laura's does. The witnesses support hers. Marissa wrote something on her pad. Rebecca looked down for 1 second, then back up. I want to say this plainly. Our first instinct as a company was to contain the incident, not understand it, not own it, contain it. That was the sentence that changed the room. Michael leaned back slightly. Ethan's expression remained calm, but something in his eyes sharpened. Rebecca did not look away. That instinct is part of the failure. Silence. Then Ethan spoke.
What do you believe the failure was?
Rebecca had prepared for this. Still, the question made her pause, because Ethan was not asking for a slogan. He was asking whether she had done the harder work. Rebecca folded her hands on the table. The failure was not just one flight attendant asking one passenger to move. It was a culture that trained our people to protect status before fairness. It was a system that made a loud, entitled customer seem more urgent than a calm, rightful one. It was the assumption that you would absorb the inconvenience because you were composed enough to do so. Ethan's gaze stayed on her. Rebecca's voice slowed, and it was racial. Whether anyone said the word or not, no one moved. Priya's face on the screen went still. Michael looked at Ethan, then back at Rebecca. Ethan asked, "What makes you say that?" Rebecca swallowed. Because if Brandon Hayes had found a white executive in seat 1A wearing a tailored suit and a familiar face, I do not believe our crew would have handled it the same way. The room went quiet again, not empty, honest. Ethan looked down at the table for the first time. Then he nodded once. That is the first true sentence I've heard from Summit Ridge. Rebecca accepted it without relief. She had not earned relief yet. We are placing Laura Mitchell on administrative review, but her honest report will be considered in her favor, Rebecca said. Andrew Collins is being removed from lead cabin duties pending investigation. Robert Fletcher is being reviewed by ground operations leadership. Brandon Hayes' elite account has been flagged for conduct review. We found prior complaints involving special treatment requests. Michael looked up. You found them overnight? Rebecca's face hardened. No, they were already in the system. We had not cared enough to connect them. That answer cost her something. Good. Ethan respected answers that cost something, Rebecca continued. We are also suspending seat preference overrides for elite passengers until we complete a policy review. No crew member will be allowed to pressure a confirmed passenger to move for another passenger's preference. If a seat change is requested, it must be voluntary, documented, and free of coercion. Marissa finally spoke. That addresses policy. What addresses culture? Rebecca turned to her. Training, but not the usual kind. Not a 30-minute online module people click through while answering emails. We are bringing in outside facilitators. We are reviewing complaint patterns. We are building escalation language that distinguishes safety compliance from customer preference. We are retraining supervisors on when not to use authority. Priya nodded slowly on the screen. That last part matters. Rebecca looked at her. Yes, it does. Ethan leaned back. And the contract? There it was. The part Summit Ridge had come afraid of. Rebecca opened the folder again, but she did not push papers across the table. We would like to renew. We would also like to discuss upgrading to the support tier we have been acting as though we already had. Michael's mouth moved slightly, almost a smile. Rebecca saw it. We reviewed the exception summary your team provided, she said. It was humbling. Ethan's voice was level. Humbling is not a contract term. No, Rebecca said, but it may be a starting point. For the first time, a faint trace of respect passed between them. Not warmth, respect. Ethan stood and walked to the window. He looked out over the harbor, hands in his pockets now. The room waited behind him. He thought of his father. Walter Caldwell in his postal uniform. Walter Caldwell telling him never to confuse calm with surrender. Walter Caldwell teaching him that dignity was not something a job title could give or take away. He thought of Helen Parker. Justice without humanity turns hard. Humanity without justice turns weak. He thought of Laura Mitchell in the aisle, choosing to apologize before being forced. He thought of Brandon Hayes saying, I'm not good at being told no. A small confession, a crack in the wall. Ethan turned back. Caldwell Systems will honor the existing agreement, he said. We will continue support as written. Safety issues will always be handled with urgency. Active operational outages will never become leverage. Rebecca nodded. But, Ethan said, the room sharpened. We will not return to informal generosity without formal respect. If Summit Ridge wants premium support, it will be contracted, paid, measured, and governed. No more invisible favors. No more assumptions. Rebecca accepted that.
And the renewal?
Ethan looked at Michael, then back at Rebecca. You may submit a revised proposal after your internal corrective plan is approved by your board and shared with us in writing. Rebecca's shoulders lowered by a fraction. Not victory, a chance. That was all, Ethan continued. If we renew, it will not be because you apologize to a CEO. It will be because your company proves it learned how to treat a passenger who could do nothing for you. Rebecca's eyes glistened, but she held herself steady. That is fair. No, Ethan said. It is necessary. The meeting ended without handshakes at first. Everyone gathered their papers. Chairs moved softly. The tension had not vanished, but it had changed shape.
It was no longer storm.
It was work. At the door, Rebecca paused. Mr. Caldwell. Ethan looked up. I know this does not erase what happened. It does not. But I hope it begins something better. Ethan studied her. Beginnings are easy, Miss Turner. Continuation is the test. She nodded. I understand. When she left, Michael stood beside Ethan near the window. You believe her? Ethan watched Rebecca's car pull away below. I believe she understands the size of the problem.
That's not the same thing.
No, Ethan said, but it is more than most people bring to the first meeting. Michael folded his arms. And you? Ethan looked toward the harbor. I'm still angry. Michael nodded. You're allowed. Ethan took a slow breath. I know. That was new too. For years, he had treated anger like something dangerous he had to lock away before entering any room. But anger, held with discipline, could become clarity. It could become a boundary. It could become a door no one else was allowed to force open again. 3 weeks later, Summit Ridge issued a public service policy update without naming Ethan. It addressed seat reassignment standards, passenger dignity, elite status boundaries, and bias and escalation decisions. Some called it overdue. Some called it public relations. Ethan read it once, then set it aside. The real work would show later, in the small choices, at gates, in cabins. In the words used when someone quiet was easier to pressure. Laura Mitchell returned to work after review and retraining. Her first week back, a frequent flyer demanded another passenger's window seat. Laura checked both boarding passes, took a breath, and said, I'm sorry, sir. That passenger is seated correctly. I can help you with your assigned seat. Her voice shook a little, but she said it. Helen Parker mailed Ethan a handwritten note on cream paper. It said, in careful cursive, you stood in your place. Others will stand taller because of it. Ethan kept the note in his desk drawer, not as proof that the pain had been worth it. Pain does not need to be justified to be real. He kept it as a reminder that witness matters. Courage travels. Dignity echoes. And sometimes one man refusing to move from a seat he paid for can force an entire company to ask who it has been moving all along. So when the world tells someone to shrink, when power asks kindness to become silence, when fairness is treated like an inconvenience, remember Ethan Caldwell in seat 1A. Remember the calm voice. Remember the notebook. Remember that respect should never require recognition first. If this story moved you, like this video, subscribe for more stories about dignity and justice, and comment these 3 words. Never stay silent.